Right, so I believe this is episode 18 of Healing with Sam. How we doing? Hope everyone's good. Hope everyone's enjoying the ride. So I think where we got to in last week's episode, or a few weeks back, was talking about processing all of my father's hatred, which I felt to be at the root of the disease. Moving through that. And so I think I said at the end of that episode we'd start then going into when I went beyond that into, it kind of opened up beyond that into the genesis of that hatred in my father, which had been passed into me, and how that was connected to his relationship with his father. And then eventually that took me back into the genesis of that hatred and where that had come from and the experiences that he had had with his father, which had led to that. I've kind of pondered over these weeks and months of doing these videos of how much of that I want to share, mainly for the kind of with the mind of how that's going to be received by my family, my father, and other people. I spoke to my mother about this actually, because everything on my mother's side has been opening up recently, and I spoke to my mother about that, honestly, about everything I was experiencing and what I felt had happened on her side of the lineage. And it was received well. So, I don't know. So essentially, what I have experienced within myself, what I have felt and processed and kind of seen, envisioned, and if you know, this is going to be kind of hard to relate to if you haven't had these experiences of deep emotional processing of things that have been deeply repressed and buried and which most people generally haven't. If you have been through those experiences, you know the kind of processes you go through and the kind of things that get opened up and the knowings you experience with that, and the kind of how things just unravel and reveal themselves, and kind of things emerge, and truth emerges with that. Of course, you can never be sure. I always hold the kind of recognition of I don't know, this is just what I've experienced and how I'm perceiving it and what I've made of it. Essentially, what I believe to have happened is that my grandfather on my father's side was sexually abused by his father. And that was the sort of genesis of all of these feelings of hatred, which then, cascaded down into this, that kind of hatred and anger that had been residing within me, which I feel to be at the root, the emotional root at least, of this disease within me. And that's a crazy process, that's been one hell of a ride. Because, ultimately, this process has just been happening within me. It's just unfolded. I don't know what's going on, I'm just trying to make sense of it all as it's happening. I'm also at a place now, I have a depth of connection to myself and to the emotional realm where I don't doubt my kind of ability to perceive and to interpret and to understand what is happening within me. Of course, you have a healthy kind of acknowledgement of you can never really be 100% sure about anything, right? But and so this had started opening up for the years before any of the kind of ancestral stuff started opening up. When I started, so about, I don't know what it would be now, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, when I started opening up all of the emotions I had repressed all of my life, there was times sort of years back where I would sometimes experience this feeling of kind of having someone on top of me, this experience of oh, like someone kind of being on top of me, invading me, and being like, oh, get off, you know. And now when that first started happening, I remember thinking like, that like did my dad like fucking do something to me or something when I was young that I've repressed, and maybe that's why I've repressed everything. Like, do you mean because I'd repressed everything up until I think I was like 28, so 4 or 5 years ago. You know, I'd repressed so much, like completely unconscious of so many different feelings. I just had no experience of what shame, guilt, you know, all these worthlessness and self-hatred and all these different things felt like. I was very rarely sad or angry or just anything. And so obviously at that time it's all starting coming up and I don't know what the fuck's going on, and I'm having that experience every now and then of this feeling of someone being on top of me. And I remember questioning at the time, like, did something happen with my dad or something when I was young? But I always felt like, no, I don't think it did. But that was the first time I kind of experienced this sort of, yeah, whatever. And then at a certain point, I can't remember when, it just opened up to beyond my father's kind of hatred into like these different feelings then connected to my grandfather. And there were several different things that started coming up with that. A lot of it was this deep, like intense, like self-hatred. I remember there was this part of me that would come up like all the time of just like, well, just really just like wanting to kill me. Like, it was this part of me that literally wanted to kill me, to destroy me. Like, you know, this intense, deep self-hatred. And there was, yeah, so as I started to kind of open up, go through these processes within myself, these emotional kind of journeys, I started kind of like seeing in my mind's eye and experiencing that kind of like sexual abuse of some sort, you know, and that feeling of like being invaded, abused, like, and the different feelings that come with that, and this feeling of just like, get him off me, like, you mean, get him the fuck away from me. And then the intense anger that come with that. And there was a lot of like anger that I was processing with that, and this image of like this young boy, you know, my grandfather, sort of like cowering in his bed and sort of, yeah. And so he's just like, there's a lot of parts work. So like, if you know anything about this kind of work, emotional healing, like parts work, internal family systems, I did a lot of parts work. Like when I'm going through these emotional processes within myself, a lot of what I'm doing is parts work, and this is what we do a lot of in the therapy I do as well. And so it's this aspect of like the subconscious visualization, giving sort of like symbols to what you're experiencing within you. And so you can connect to these parts of yourself, and obviously these parts are not even originating with me, so it's like, it's interesting because it's like a part of me, but actually it isn't me as well. Like, I mean, it's something that's been passed into me, but for all intents and purposes now is me, and it's my experience, and it's something that lives within me. And there was lots of different, yeah, just intense feelings and processes and journeys and kind of like visual like things that come with that as I worked through that process. And then there was this one feeling that come up during the last time I did ayahuasca, which was November of 24, which was this feeling of, I don't want to live. I just don't want to live. I remember it come up a couple nights before the first ayahuasca ceremony on this retreat, just out of nowhere. I was in bed and just all of a sudden this feeling come up of like, I don't want to live. And I didn't have any kind of like understanding of what that was at the time, or like for the rest of the retreat. I think it was only like weeks or months after I kind of realized, oh, it was connected to my grandfather, and it was some of his feelings connected to this whole like process. But that was a super intense one, like, you know, and it come up during the ceremony, the second ceremony, I think. I think I've told a couple stories from this ceremony before, but this was the most intense, I think, ceremony I've sat in. So like with the first cup, it just came on hard and fast, and took me straight into that feeling of I don't want to live, and just brought me to my knees instantly, and I'm just weeping and weeping and weeping, and everything. Obviously, everything's so intensified and amplified by the ayahuasca, and so like, oh, you know, it's just tearing me apart, and the visions that I'm having with that, like, you know, like the kind of the symbolic visions of like of that feeling. You can imagine. I mean, you can't imagine. Like, I couldn't even try and recall now, but I know it was like, you know, the visions you have connected to that feeling of I don't want to live, super dark and intense and scary, and just like, and that went on for like, I don't know, I think a solid like 40 minutes or so of I was just, you know, an absolute mess, just in this, whoa, the intensity of this feeling of I don't want to live. Yeah, and then that was then, sort of after that finished, we were sat around the fire for the first part of this ceremony, and I sort of sat back in my chair, and this was when I had that rising of Kundalini energy. I was just sat there, and just out of nowhere, I could just feel this energy all of a sudden, just like start rising from my root, and just like start spreading, and literally physically spread my legs apart. I was there, and it just like forced my legs open, like, and I was like, oh my god. I was like, and it just, whoa, I just knew it was this Kundalini energy starting to rise, and it felt like it was going to be a complete obliteration. It felt like it was going to destroy me, and I resisted it. I said like, no, not now, like, not now. And it was saying to me, like, we could do it right now. We could heal from CF right now. We could go beyond that right now. And I was just like, nah. And that was when I realized this resistance I have to letting go of the disease, and how much, like, my identity is wrapped up in having this disease. Yeah. But then, yeah, I think after that ceremony, then the sort of 6 months after that, leading up to the summer of last year, 2025, that process of everything to do with my granddad really just started ramping up, and I'm going through these big processes all the time of these different feelings connected to that. Yeah, this feeling of being undeserving of life, this feeling of not wanting to live, this feeling of just pure hatred towards myself, and just thinking you should die. Like, do you mean, just like, which of course are normal, like normal feelings that people experience when they've had those kind of like traumatic, abusive experiences, you know. And then it all sort of came to a head. There was a period of 2 months, I think, which I think came to an end in August or September last year, where it was all really just, you know, every day I'm going into these deep processes with it. And then, yeah, I had this period of like a week where I had these few crazy dreams, like, and I had this one dream where in this dream I was like climbing up this tree or something, and then it turned into like a staircase in this mad building, and then there was like this buffet happening and I was having some buffet, and then there was like a dude sat behind me all of a sudden, and I kind of instantly knew as I looked at him, like, oh, it's done, isn't it? Like, I've healed, haven't I? And he was like, yeah. And then like that kind of like dude to like this like white kind of like ball of energy, of spirit, of just something, this being kind of like appeared, or the scene kind of changed and it was just darkness, and then this like ball of like light energy spirit just appeared in front of me. And as I locked eyes with it, I was just filled with the most rapturous, mind-blowing like knowing that I have healed and that I've gone beyond this disease. And just, you know, like, and it was so real, this dream. And then like after that, this other light appeared, and it was a bit further away, and it was like even more powerful. And as I locked eyes with it, just like, you know, so much energy coursing through me. Like, I'm still dreaming at this point, but it was happening, like, you know, it was happening. And then like it turned back to this scene in the restaurant, and this dude is there behind me. And again, I just like said to him in that moment, like, it's done, isn't it? And he was like, yeah. And then that just, and I'm like holding his arm is like across my chest, and I'm holding it and just start like weeping and crying and just like coursing with this energy. And then I woke up literally weeping and like fucking on fire with this energy, and I'm like holding my quilt like this, like ripping it, like, which was his arm, and just like, and just, and it was crazy because it was so real. It felt so real that like, it felt like those were spirits that I was connecting with in this dream. And it just felt so real, and I was like, there's no way that wasn't real. There's no way those weren't beings of some sort that I was connecting with, and was like filling me with this knowing. And I've had this experience of that like a lot of times in different moments over the last few years, of just this knowing of healing, and it just setting my whole body on fire, you know, just with the knowing, the rapture, the certainty of just like, I think I was meditating later that day on like whether those were indeed real spirits, like asking myself, asking my body, and my body was like very much on fire with a yes. And I was like, was that my grandfather? And it was like, yes. And it was like, was the other one my great grandmother on my mother's side? And it was like, yes. So I think at that point I'd already like, I don't know why I thought that at that point, but yeah. Yeah, so, and then I had another dream maybe a couple nights later, where I was like flying like through these like ceilings, like, and it was like I was breaking through each ceiling was in each layer of this ancestral, kind of like through me, through my father, through my granddad. And then as I broke through this last one, just again, just flooded with this just rapturous knowing of like, I've done it, I've cleared what I've needed to clear on my father's side emotionally to go beyond this disease. And I woke up just again in this just rapturous, like, and I mean like my whole body, do you know, I just wake up from this dream and my whole body is just, you know, if you've had an experience like that, of that just like rapture, that coursing energy of just, you know, it's not nothing. It's not just, these experiences don't mean nothing, they're not pointing to nothing. I think it's safe to assume. And then I'm lying there, and this voice came into my head telling me to sit up. And it was like, it was not even my voice, like it was not even like my thought, it was like coming from outside, like, sit up. And it felt ominous because it felt like something big was going to happen. And then I had this thought of like, you have to choose now. You have to choose. Do you really want to let go of this disease? And I remember instantly this kind of like voice of like, there was one of these parts, because like connected to my grandfather, was just like, no, like just instantly, just kind of like this dark kind of thing just went like, no. But then my body just took over, and the lion, I think I was speaking about the lion in the last video, right? My connection with this lion at this point had developed. I'd had a few journeys since that journey with ayahuasca where the lion comes into my experience and these processes that I'm having, and it was like the lion just took over my body, and just like that voice that was like, no, my whole body just sprung up with the energy of the lion of just like, like, yes. Fuck you, like, yes, we're doing this, like, I'm choosing to heal, I want this, like, this is what we're doing. And then I think then that, like, dark, like, demonic part of, like, was like, no, you don't deserve it, come in. And then I could feel the energy of this part, right, because this has been a big part of like these different things coming up connected with my grandfather, this part of like, no, you don't deserve it, you don't deserve to heal, you don't deserve to live, you don't deserve nothing. I could feel that all of a sudden on me, and it felt very much all of a sudden like not part of me but something separate. And I don't know if I've spoken about this before, but I've had several experiences at this point of like entities, energies, whatever, kind of coming in, latching on or whatever. Like, I know when there's something present that isn't me, that doesn't originate with me, that is kind of an out external, like, energy or whatever. And I could feel the darkness of this thing, like this past, just like, no, you don't deserve to heal, you don't deserve to live. And I was just like, whoa. And it's scary, when you have these experiences of like, external energies, entities being present within you. Of course, it's like, it's unnerving. But I'd experienced it enough at this point to be like, to know how to handle that and what to do. And it's essentially just a case of bringing yourself to love, raising the kind of frequency, the vibration that it cannot, like, so that kind of, the vibration of that energy cannot cling to you, it's not a match for where you're at, and so cannot stay attached to you. And so I start bringing myself up to love and just loving this kind of like this darkness, this entity, and just like it slowly started coming up, coming out, and then like eventually I just got to this point of like fully just letting go of resisting it and just thanking it and just saying thank you, like thank you for everything. And with that, it just come out and just like, and I could feel it wanting to come back in, and me just being like, no, thank you, blessings to you, but goodbye. And it was gone. And then immediately the next, like, so there was like 4 or 5 key like feelings, parts connected to this process with my grandfather that had been coming up. And so then for each of those different feelings, each of those different parts, so this part that was like, you don't deserve to live, and it was like this part of like pure hatred, and then this part of like I can't remember what it was, like I was reading in my book earlier, I don't know, it's not important, but like each of these different feelings, I then went through this process of like this kind of like external energy of each of those parts coming up, and just going through that same process of bringing myself to love, bringing them out, thanking them, blessing them on their way, like thank you, I love you, but goodbye. And then come into the end of that and just, And that was interesting because I'd had a conversation with someone, maybe on that last ayahuasca retreat, actually, I think it was. And she was telling me, when you're going through these big emotional processes, you also have to clear the energy, because there's energy like that gets attached to these things that you're carrying and feeds on it, and it's like you also have to clear that. And it felt like that. It felt like, and I don't know, I can't give you an explanation as to what the fuck that is and what that's all about. But yeah, it felt like this kind of external energy and that clings to that and feeds off that, and there's like in this sort of like symbiotic relationship with that exists within you, was cleared. And in that moment, I knew, like, I've done everything I need to do. On my father's side, as it relates to the emotional root of this disease, I've done what I need to do to clear that. And then instantly, like, stuff started coming up on my mother's side, and I was just like, nah. I was like, it was the middle of the night, like, I just woken up from this dream. I was like, nah, we ain't doing any more. Like, we can come back to that. That's enough for now. Like, I was just like, let me chill. But part of that was just the resistance, I think, to not wanting to really get rid of this disease. Well, that's something I've been working on more recently. But yeah. So that's the story of how I believe that I have cleared the emotional, ancestral baggage that has caused this disease within me in my lifetime. On my father's side, and yeah, now recently I've kind of been opening up on my mother's side, which again is, I believe, to be rooted in sexual abuse at the hands of the father. And so, yeah, going through that process again now with all of that. Yeah, make of that what you will. It's interesting, isn't it? Like, who knows, but yeah, I very clearly just kind of felt and knew, like, that's done. I've done everything I need to do on my father's side. And nothing, like, no feelings, no emotion, no nothing to do with any of it has come up since that moment. Like, I feel like that's cleared. And yeah, now it's just dealing with my mother's side. And then I think it'll be, at that point, like, who knows where that's going to leave me. I think beyond that is also the kind of necessity of breaking fully the identity of having CF. Like, I'm very aware that there's massive resistance within me to letting go of the disease because of it being such a large part of my identity. But yeah, it's been 27 minutes. Bloody hell. Best leave it there. I don't know, yeah. Make of that what you will. Mad stuff, eh? Take it easy. Have a wicked one. See you on the next one. I don't know where we're going in the story from there. Yeah, we'll see. Bye-bye.